Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another random review. Today's random review is another TV show, and it's Millennium, and we're going to talk about Season 1. Millennium is sadly only available on DVD. I don't have the packaging, I just have the discs. Created by X-Files creator Chris Carter. This was the follow-up show, which was nowhere near as successful. It ran from 1996 to 1999. It stars Lance Henriksen, the wonderful Lance Henriksen, and Megan Gallagher, Bill Smitrovich, Terry O'Quinn, and lots of character actors. There's a reason why it didn't do as well. It is much darker. Lance Henriksen plays an ex-FBI profiler who joins a group called the Millennium Group, which is theoretically preparing for the year 2000, and there's an escalation in strange crimes, and they are investigating these crimes. They pretty much have a free remit to pretty much, it seems, to go into any investigation they kind of feel like. You can kind of tell even by the music. You know, the X-Files music was very kind of inquisitive and curious and spooky. The Millennium score by Mark Snow, who did the X-Files music as well, is very mournful, use of strings, it's more downbeat. The titles and the look of the film are very Seven based, like David Fincher. It generally rains a lot, it's very kind of moodily shot. But when the show is good, it's absolutely fantastic. I've always been a fan of it. I was never that much of a fan of the X-Files. I've watched a bit of the X-Files, but I certainly haven't watched all 11 seasons. There was obviously some creepy episodes about the guy who squeezes himself into little spaces. And I think there was a good werewolf episode, if I remember correctly. But on the whole, I was never really a big fan of the X-Files. I've always preferred Millennium, because that's kind of the dark one that's never really talked about. Like I say, obviously the X-Files is on Blu-ray and in box sets, and Millennium is still just on DVD, which is a great shame, because like I say, I think when it's at its best, it's absolutely fantastic, and Season 1 is certainly its best. Like I say, it ran for 3 seasons, and unfortunately it kind of lost its way a bit. I'll get into why in Season 2 and 3, but it's really another example of one of those shows. It pretty much starts off for the majority of Season 1, it is a procedural. It's Frank Black, Lance Henriksen's character, being involved in cases every week and solving or getting to a conclusion to those cases every week. But like quite a lot of shows, you know, that seems to not be enough for the creators, so they have to invent conspiracies and shadow groups and all of that. And to me, that's where Millennium kind of lost its way. It's kind of like, it's obviously completely different, but it's sort of similar to Twin Peaks in the sense that when it was under certain people's control, it went a certain direction, and then when other people got involved, it kind of meandered off before kind of reining it back in. It's debatable whether Millennium ever reined back in, but certainly for the first season, it's more procedural case based, and it's absolutely fantastic. Again, the majority of the season 1 discs, now these came out in DVD quite some time ago, 1997, but the majority of season 1 is a certificate 18 in the UK. And again, season 2 and 3 are generally 15 certificates and 12 certificate with the occasional 18 certificate disc. But the majority of season 1 is in 18. There's no swearing, there's no profanity, there's no nudity. It's because the subject matter is pretty dark and fairly strong meat, and it's actually surprising that Fox transmitted some of this stuff because it is pretty dark. I mean, obviously it doesn't, there's cutaways at the last second to a lot of kind of darker material, but it's still pretty strong stuff, way stronger than anything that the X-Files ever did. I think it was shown, obviously I didn't have Fox because I live in the UK, but I'm guessing it was shown much later than what the X-Files was. But again, you can see why it never really caught on, or it was never popular, because of it is downbeat, it is unrelentingly grim at times. There's not a lot of light or hope in the series. So I'm just going to go through each episode. I don't have the smartest ideas in the world, and when I decided to do this, I kind of forgot that the first season has 22 episodes, which again probably speaks to Chris Carter's success with the X-Files. He pretty much had like a blank check. It's like, there's 20 odd episodes, go away and do what you like. There's a nice special feature on disc 6 of season 1 where Chris Carter talks about being given Millennium, and he can pretty much just run with it. Whereas normally with TV shows, they maybe get a run of 10 or even 6 in some cases for the first season, and we see how that season goes. But obviously Chris Carter, with the weight of the X-Files behind him, it's just like, yeah, have 22 episodes for season 1. So unfortunately, I will have to go through my notes. I'm not going to give away plot spoilers, because obviously in shows like this, there'll be lots to spoil. So I'm just going to give an overview of each episode, because for the most part, out of 22 episodes, I would say 20 of them are absolutely fantastic. Again, it's subjective, but I think if you are interested in serial killer kind of stuff and psychological stuff, I think there's a lot to enjoy. And obviously Lance Henriksen is absolutely fantastic, and as I'll get into, there's a heavy Manhunter vibe. So if you're a fan of Michael Mann's Manhunter and that kind of subject matter, I think you would like Millennium. So Lance Henriksen plays Frank Black. Like I said, he's a ex-FBI profiler, and he has a gift where he can get into the mind of the killer, and we kind of see what he's seeing from the killer's point of view. That's the kind of thing with the show, but obviously there's a toll to be paid on him and the people around him, but we'll get to that. And it, like I say, it also stars Megan Gallagher, who's fantastic, who, in some of these shows, the wife is like just kind of dumped with the family stuff and doesn't really have that much to do, but she actually works with victim support, and she actually is prominent in a few episodes where it's actually her investigation, and Frank's kind of helping out, so that's a nice kind of change of pace. They moved to Seattle, Washington, or the Washington state area from Washington DC, to get away from his old job because he had a breakdown, very much like William Peterson's character in Manhunter, and they buy this wonderful bright yellow house, which is kind of, a symbol of the refuge away from all this dark and disturbing stuff that he does for a living. And their daughter Jordan, and like I say, he works now for this Millennium group, and the main operative is Terry O'Quinn from Lost fame. I think Lost was after Millennium. Again, I've never watched Lost either. And like I say, they kind of get involved either in local PD or FBI cases, which again, from a writing perspective of a TV show, it means you can pretty much go wherever they like and get involved in any investigation. So the pilot episode, there is a killer who is doing nasty things, which is a common theme in the episodes, but it's about prophecy and the end of the world and apocalypse. And again, the show, there's a running theme with, remember all the panic about the year 2000, and the show kind of preys on that. So lots of episodes kind of, there's not a link to them, but there's a kind of common feeling of angst and more chaos towards the Millennium. Some good music in this episode between White Zombie and Nine Inch Nails and Portishead. It starts with this guy going to a strip club and reciting French poetry, and then one of the strippers is found dead. He goes to a gay cruising park, and he kills somebody there. There's kind of nasty, horrible things found in the woods, which I won't go into. But it's a wonderful opening episode because it sets the atmosphere. Again, it rains for most of the first episode. It is shot, it's highly influenced by Seven, as far as the tone and the look of the show. But again, you have this bright yellow house, which is the kind of refuge where Frank gets some kind of perspective in what he's doing. And we're introduced to Bill Smitrovich, who again was in Manhunter. He's appeared with Michael Mann a few times, and he knows Frank from the old days, and he's in charge of the local homicide. We also have Stephen J. Lang, not Stephen Lang, who was in Manhunter. I'm sure he must be his brother, I think, because they do look similar. I'm not sure on that. And one of the great things about the show is Frank's interactions with like local PD, who obviously are kind of either skeptical of his talents until they realise he knows who he's talking about, or they're resistant to his help, suggesting we don't have that kind of thing here, and then they realise we've got that kind of thing here. It's just a great opening episode, and we are at the end, we have a little teaser about maybe one of the reasons why Frank had the breakdown in the first place, but again, I'm not going to go into that. And we're introduced by Peter Watts, who is the Millennium contact, played by Terry O'Quinn. So episode 2 is Gehenna, which is Hebrew for hell, and this involves a very strange call centre, psychotropic drugs. There's a pile of human ashes found in a garden in San Francisco. Again, because it's the Millennium Group, they can go anywhere they like, pretty much across America. So it's not all set in Seattle, Washington. This one's an interesting episode, and certainly probably still relevant today. There is kind of some nasty, horrible forensic details that I won't go into. But that's a nice episode 2. Episode 3 is Dead Letters, which is another excellent episode. It's about a killer in Oregon that kills people in the service industry and leaves messages. He chops them in two, defecates at the scene, and leaves messages like "here today, gone tomorrow," which he etches in various body parts. Again, if you're an X-Files fan expecting kind of light-hearted banter and stuff, again, this isn't the show, and that's probably one of the reasons why it wasn't successful, because this is it's fairly dark stuff. But again, this is a wonderful episode because he's teamed with a detective who has been highlighted by the Millennium Group as a possible future member of the group. But this guy has recently been separated from his wife, and he takes all the killings personally. But as Frank says, you're not getting in, the killer is not getting into your mind, you're putting your mind into his. So you're just making everything personal, and it shouldn't be. So it's a wonderful episode which shows you the damage and the cost that can be done if you actually profile these criminals in the wrong way. If you take it all personally and you put their thoughts into your head instead of, projecting the proper way. So that's a really good episode of showing that balance of why, you have to profile these guys the right way. And yes, most of them are men, and yes, obviously the show, a lot of women get killed and a lot of women are attacked, not exclusively, but at the end of the day, most of these psychopathic, sociopathic killers are men, and quite a lot of them attack women. That's just men for you. The next episode's another classic called The Judge. This stars Marshall Bell, probably in his greatest performance. He was in Total Recall. He was the one that had the little sidekick attached to him. And John Hawkes, who was the shopkeeper at the beginning of From Dusk Till Dawn. He was in Miami Vice. He's in quite a lot now, but mid-90s he was fairly unknown. And this is about an ex-judge who recruits ex-cons as soon as they come out of prison and kind of grooms them to exact revenge on people that got away with things through the justice system. And he lives on a pig farm. Don't need to say any more about that. And CCH Pounder, character actor, she plays an ME, a Millennium Specialist ME. She turns up quite often during the seasons. It's a really good episode, but again, I'm not going to go into specific plot points, because again, there's a lot of episodes to get through, and apologies because this video is probably going to be way too long for people to actually watch. Never mind. The next episode again is another classic. It's 522666, which is about a bomber, and that's I won't tell you. It's about a bomber who likes to involve himself in the actual scene, and it's in Washington DC, so of course they think it's a terrorist to start with, but again, this is more about the psychology of an individual killer who loves the attention and wants the attention. It's just a fantastic episode. Next is another corker. It's called Kingdom Come, and we're in back in Washington State, and some priests get killed. They get burned at the stake and drowned. Again, this is a cheery show. And this co-stars Lindsay Krause, David Mamet's ex-wife, who was so wonderful in House of Games. Again, she plays an FBI agent who Frank Black does the investigation with, because it's similar to killings that happened 4 years ago. And again, it's a wonderful episode. Again, I'm not going to go into details. Next is Blood Relatives, which is another twisty-turny episode, but in the end it's actually quite sad. A woman who's at her son's funeral, once everybody goes, she's dragged into an open grave, well, her son's open grave before he's buried, and is murdered. And it seems as though there's a killer who goes to funerals and preys on mourners. Again, why this show wasn't popular, I have no idea. Again, not going to get into the specifics of who did it and why, but in the end it's actually quite sad. Because that's another thing for me that makes Millennium so good, is the fact it doesn't portray these killers as just one-dimensional characters. There's usually some reason, either it's childhood or, and again, some people believe killers like this are born this way, and other people obviously believe that it's to do with nurture and environment and things that happen to them during their lives create this rather than being made like this. But that's another debate for another video. And then we have episode number 8, The Well-Worn Lock, which is a chance for Megan Gallagher as Catherine in victim support. This is the majority of the episode. She's the lead investigator, and Frank just kind of comes and goes. But this is about a 33-year-old woman who lives with her parents and her sister, and it comes out that possibly the father, who's a local celebrated businessman, has been abusing her since she was 8 years old. It co-stars Paul Dooley, who again you might not know the name of, because I probably wouldn't get his name off the top of my head, but you certainly recognise the face. He gives a great performance as the patriarch who's accused of child abuse, because it turns out that what we think is the 33-year-old woman's daughter is actually her sister is actually her daughter, fathered by the father. Again, why this programme wasn't more popular, I have no idea. That's a really good episode as well. Number 9 is Wide Open, which again is another cheery episode about a killer who preys on people who have an open house. So he comes to the open house and then hides in the house, and then does nasty things to the family who's selling the house. Again, this should have been on Christmas or something. There's actually a nice appearance by the incumbent mayor from The Wire, which I can't remember his name, who also played Larry Fishburne's dad in Deep Cover. And again, it's all about camcorders, and that's one thing. It's 1990s, so there are like VCRs and camcorders and stuff, which obviously younger people might not know what they are, but they used to have videotape, if you can believe that. And again, just to show, because sometimes you will say, how did this actually get on television? But there's almost, because we see the killer watching video he's recorded of the scene, so it's almost like that infamous scene from Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. And it's like this was on Fox, this was on network television. It's like, so that's a really good one. The next one, episode 10, which for me is one of the weaker episodes, The Wild and the Innocent. And to me, it's kind of a riff on Terrence Malick's Badlands. There's obviously other things going on, this kind of mistaken identity and things like that, which again I'm not going to go into. But for me, it's one of the weaker episodes, but it's still It's still obviously watchable because Lance Henriksen's just awesome. His stares are very good, and because of the way Lance Henriksen looks, you know he's been through a lot. You can tell the toll that this quote unquote gift has taken on him, so there's a weight there, whereas if it was a traditional kind of American TV or Hollywood leading man, he wouldn't look like Lance Henriksen. So for example, if this was remade now or rebooted now, it wouldn't be somebody that looks like Lance Henriksen. As far as that world weary, I have experienced things and dark things. So the next episode is Weeds, which is one of the best ones. It's about this gated community, and a teenage boy goes missing, and another dead teenage boy turns up in his bed like 3 days later, and Frank Black's brought in, and again there's the usual, local police services, not believing that this could happen, and the local community not believing this kind of thing could happen, and that's why they've got this gated community to protect themselves from this. But when they actually realise that the person that's doing it is probably one of their own. Again, I'm not going to go into it, but it's just wonderful. Again, CCH Pounder turns up as the ME, and she gets involved in the case. The next episode is Loin Like a Hunting Flame, which is obviously very difficult for me to say. This is about someone who drugs couples and films them having sex, and then kills them by leaving them in wonderful gardens and creating kind of an Adam and Eve setting. Again, lots of family fun. It's just another wonderful one about psychology, about sexual fantasy, and again, another wonderfully upbeat episode. Next we have Force Majeure, which is certainly more along the year 2000 lines, and it's got a wonderful guest turn by Brad Dourif, who plays a weirdo. There's a shock. We're introduced to this character who's in an iron lung. There's freak storms, and this blonde girl at university self-immolates, sets herself on fire. There's another blonde girl in another part of the States who climbs on top of a dam and jumps off. They both look the same, they have same scars, and this is about in the year 2000, which is 21 years ago. But also at the time it was coming up. There's going to be, the planets are going to align, and cataclysm, and the end of the world. Brad Dourif's fantastic in it. It's really kind of creepy, and you see Frank's disdain for the antagonist of the episode. So yes, he can get into the head, and he can kind of understand to an extent, but he still has, rage at what these people are doing, but it's a controlled rage because it's Lance Henriksen. That's another great episode, and again CCH Pounder turns up as the ME. Thin White Line is another classic episode. This is about Frank's past. There's a killer who accepts invitations, or he imagines people are asking him to kill them. And this is similar to killings that happened 20 years ago when Frank was in the FBI, was a young FBI agent, and he was attacked by this killer, but he survived, unlike some of his colleagues. But it's the MO of the killer who is in prison. So there's somebody out there copying what he did in prison. Now this one has got Manhunter written all over it, because there's a scene where Frank goes to the prison to interrogate the guy who did the killings way back, and it's an absolutely classic scene. It's absolutely wonderful, and the kind of request that the guy in prison has is actually quite romantic. And the end of the episode is wonderful. There's a great exchange where the killer in the prison is like, if they're going to make a movie of me, I think Gary Busey should play me. And Lance Henriksen, because he asks, is Gary Busey still popular? And Lance Henriksen says, I don't get cable. But it's certainly straight out of Manhunter and Thomas Harris and Lecter. But it's just such a great episode. Next is Sacrament. And again, for me, this is one of the weaker episodes. Still worth watching. Frank is at his brother's christening. And if I was a family member of Frank Black, I would probably avoid getting him to any event, because his sister-in-law is abducted. It's strange enough, when Frank Black turns up, things start to go wrong. And the search and the suspect list kind of focuses on this guy who has recently been in a mental institution and has recently been released. But is he actually responsible? I mean, it's a good little episode, but compared to the best episodes in the season, it doesn't quite stand up, but it's still very good. Because again, you have his brother getting a view of what Frank's process is, and his brother again reminds him that you can't protect your family. Your family and those around you pay for what you're doing. So again, philosophical stuff is always really interesting in this show. And again, it's not just how his gift affects Frank, it's how it affects his entire family and friends. The next episode is Covenant, which is a really good one as well. It's about a father, ex-cop, well, no, I think he still is a cop, who kills his whole family. Again, this is happy-go-lucky entertainment. And then 6 months later, Frank is brought in because they're trying to get the death penalty, and the prosecutor is quite zealous to get the death penalty. There's a whole theme of angels. The numbers 12815 is in blood on the window at the scene. But again, Frank isn't convinced that the father actually did it, even though the father is saying, I did it, I just want to be punished, I just want it to be executed. But Frank's not convinced. Again, another really good episode. Then we have Walkabout, which starts in a clinic, and we see people going mad, including Frank, who tries to smash the window of the door in. And then it goes back to earlier, and then it flips forward to Frank being found in an alley, and he can't remember how he got there. And then it's him trying to piece together, he was part of a clinical trial, but he wouldn't have taken a drug knowingly. There is an actor in it that fans of Homicide: Life in the Street will be used to and will recognise. Again, it's a really fun little episode about potentially contaminating the entire nation's water supply with a psychotropic drug and an anti-psychotropic drug that makes people aggressive. Again, another hilarious episode of the show. Next up is Lamentation, which is arguably the the most disturbing episode in the show, the most upsetting episode in the show, because a kind of main character dies. For me, it's in third place as far as the most distressing things that happen in a TV show. It's right up there with what happens to Pemberton in Homicide: Life in the Street, which absolutely shocked me when it happened, when I watched it for the first time. It's still upsetting. And in number 2 place is what happens to Omar at the end of The Wire, which again was pretty shocking. This one's in third place for me, what happens to this character. But the story is there's this particularly nasty serial killer who has killed several nurses. Again, a bit of a Lecter character, and he's donating a kidney to his sister. But he escapes during the process, or was he abducted? Again, I'm not going to go into it, apart from it's a genuinely creepy episode. Again, this was shown on network American television, but it's really upsetting because the characters are written really well, and you do get to know them and you like them, and then this show's pretty much saying, anybody can die. You can't just get into this comfort zone where a lot of cop shows do. Oh, there's always an episode where somebody gets shot and they go to hospital and everybody's upset, but then they recover. There's always an episode of somebody taking it too far but then reeling back. Obviously for television and dramatic purposes, there's always episodes where Frank or somebody else doesn't call for backup and goes into the dark place by themselves, which they shouldn't. But it is dramatic license. But this is also one of the episodes where the show gives you a glimpse of what it's going to be, because all these episodes up to this point have been about, human evil, what's evil. During this episode, Frank talks about why he didn't want this serial killer who's a doctor. So there's obviously a Dr. Lecter kind of rip-off. Why he didn't want him executed, because he wanted to be studied. To try and get to the nature of evil. But this episode goes a different tangent on not necessarily human evil. So it is a kind of clue to what might come later. So it might kind of change from perhaps a grounded procedural to something a little bit different. And again, you can argue whether that's a good thing for the show or a bad thing for the show. But this episode is absolutely amazing. But it's tough, and it's actually quite upsetting. Well, for me anyway. But it's certainly one of the best episodes of any show, I think. So next we have Powers, Principalities, Thrones and Dominions, which would make a great album title. And this is it has a link to the previous episode, as far as obviously Catherine and Frank are struggling to come to terms with what happened in the previous episode. So at the start of this episode, there's this kind of teenage guy who shoots an older guy in a parking lot. But it's not quite how Frank sees it. There's a murder involving Satanism. There's this shady lawyer character who seems to know about Frank and what happened. And in the previous episode, unless you just watched the show. And there's a couple of murders that this other young boy admits to, and then says, well, I killed the person from the last episode, unless he was watching the other episode as well. He knows in different parts of the country. And obviously Frank is a bit confused about this, as we all are. But again, it's this, there's maybe something going on that's bigger than this focused procedural series that's going on. So those two episodes, Lamentation and Powers, Principalities, Thrones and Dominions, is a kind of clue to what's going to follow, or what the kind of themes that are going to follow later on in the show. Next is Broken World, where we're kind of thankfully back to a more procedural episode. Not a particularly nice episode, and certainly one I wouldn't recommend if you like horses. But to be honest, after those last two, you're actually wanting a bit of a respite, because you're still probably weeping uncontrollably after Lamentation. There's been horse attacks across a state, several counties, but the last one, a woman is cattle prodded unconscious. She's not killed, but the word help is scrawled in blood. So Frank is brought in to investigate. The local sheriff again doesn't think it's much of a big deal, but Frank is pretty much saying these are the embryonic moments of a killer, because he's just starting to fantasize, and not surprisingly more deaths occur. And again, it's a great episode. I should say it's a great episode. Yeah, it's about a serial killer who kills horses and then women. But again, it's about the birth of a serial killer, the fantasies that are going on in his head, and it's also got really disturbing things about mare's urine, because mare's urine is used in hormone replacement therapy, but every time, it's especially the urine from a pregnant mare, and obviously pregnant mares produce foals, but those foals are generally just killed, and then they just get the mare pregnant again to get more urine, which is kind of, I don't know whether that still goes on, but it's pretty disgusting. But anyway, that's a lovely little episode. Moving on, don't worry, we've just got two more if you're feeling completely depressed. Marantha, which is, it's just this talking about getting depressed. This one is about the effects of Chernobyl. So we're in Brooklyn with the Russian community, and there's some killings, not surprisingly, and it's not surprisingly as far as the show, not because we're in the Russian community in Brooklyn. And there's this kind of Kaiser Soze figure of Yapokchnik, which I haven't said properly, which allegedly is this Russian equivalent of the boogeyman who's going about killing people. This features Bill Nunn, good old Bill Nunn, and there's a Russian cop who's helping Frank investigate. You know, his motives for finding what's going on might not be completely honourable, or following the proper codes of justice. Again, it's another interesting episode, again leaning towards more of the apocalyptic view. Again, it's perhaps not the strongest out of the 22, but it's still pretty good. And then we come to a wonderful close with Paper Dove, which features guest stars Mike Starr, the wonderful Mike Starr, This might actually be his best performance of his career. Obviously he's wonderful in Miller's Crossing and so many other films where he usually plays a heavy. But he makes a change here by playing a serial killer. And this is a serial killer who abducts women, from after they come home from the supermarket, and he takes them out, he kills them, takes them out to a national park, has a campsite, buries them with leaves, but comes back to talk to them and have conversations, because he's one of those serial killers that has a domineering mother, so he essentially kills the women to shut his mother up. And there's also a subplot of Frank is at his in-laws, which is never a good sign because trouble always follows him. And his father-in-law asks him to go and speak to one of his friends whose son is accused of murder and is in prison. But again, Frank, on talking to the guy, doesn't think he actually did it, and he's perhaps linked to the killings that are going on by the Woodsman, as he's called, by Mike Starr. It's a really good episode, and because it's the end of the season, it ends in a huge cliffhanger because somebody goes missing at the end of the episode, because there's a second perp involved with Mike Starr's The Woodsman, who's almost suggesting victims, and it's really strange because he seems to have an obviously fake nose on, but we'll have to wait until season 2 to find out exactly what the heck is going on with this guy, if it's a guy at all, or if it's a human at all. It's just your typical season ending cliffhanger, but after those 22 episodes you should be thoroughly depressed, but also riveted. You might want to go for a shower. Again, it's a perfect example of why this show never really took off and isn't really talked about that much, but for me, season 1 is just one of the best seasons of television you'll ever see. Within that formula, of course it's still formulaic, like I say, people go into places they shouldn't be going without backup, things obviously happen just for dramatic purposes, but I think because of Lance Henriksen, because you're with him every step of the way, because he's just got one of those great faces, you believe the stuff that's going on or comes out of his mouth just because he's Lance Henriksen. Megan Gallagher's character is strong enough and good enough on her own, so she's not just like the one-dimensional wife at home while he does all the crazy dark stuff. It's a wonderful performance by their dog, Bill Smitrovich even, is absolutely fantastic. The rapport with him and Lance Henriksen is great. There's wonderful guest star turns, the mood, the way it's shot, that mournful music will be in your head after you watch it. It's just such a great show, and it is such a shame that it doesn't get the coverage it should. Like I said, all 11 seasons of the X-Files are on Blu-ray, whereas Millennium is still on DVD. It could really do with a nice Blu-ray treatment, seeing there only is 3 seasons. So thanks very much for watching season 1. I apologise for the length of the video because I kind of forgot the first season's got 22 episodes. But don't worry, because I think there's still 45 episodes still to go. So thanks very much for watching. Please leave comments below if you've seen Millennium season 1, what your favourite episode was. Were you crying like a small child after a lamentation? And hopefully you'll join me again for perhaps a random review of season 2. I don't know how long that will take though, but you never know. I might do season 2 and season 3 because I think it's an interesting show to talk about as far as what changed, perhaps why it changed, why it was, whether it was good or bad, even though for me it did kind of lose its way a bit. But again, it's a common thing with shows. It's like the creators sometimes forget what made the show good, or they somehow think we can't just have it about one thing, we have to send it off in different streams to make it more interesting, but sometimes that just means it loses its way from what made it good in the first place. And I certainly wouldn't forgive anybody for watching season 1 and then getting to a point of just not watching any more of it. But we'll discuss that if I do a follow-up episode of season 2. But I've rambled on long enough. I apologise once again for the length of the video, and hopefully you will join me again for more random reviews, whether they be Millennium or not. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying don't go into the slaughterhouse, and farewell.